Me. So here's a little bit about me. I'm part of a diaspora, which means the Tamil diaspora. We are have been in the past and actively persecuted in the island of Sri Lanka. There's a lot of politics going on, no reparations, a lot of missing people as an effect from the ethnic cleansing and agendas from the government. And I'm also part of the LGBT plus community. So again, quite a lot of persecution and trying to reconcile two sides of my identity. One of the things I really love about my heritage is that we give thanks to our ancestors for what has been built on, and we also try and plant seeds of change that might not necessarily be for us to enjoy. It's for younger generations in the future to enjoy. So that's my philosophy when it comes to work like this, to be able to allow people who are swimming against the tide to have a little bit of an easier journey, if that makes sense. And a lot of this work came into play when I was at university, both at Hull and Bristol, where I did a lot of outreach work, volunteering. So a lot of that came into my passion, and I wanted to start putting that into my actual job, which is why I started working for Learning Science as a digital learning specialist and a project manager, which means I get stuff done as well. So that's me. And what we're going to cover in the talk is just quickly go through what Learning Science do, because some of you might be familiar, some of you might not be, about what we do, what inclusivity actually means to us, why it's important in the particular product that I'm going to talk about, consideration for inclusive design practices, and considerations for accessibility, what we're doing in terms of both, and what sort of future direction we see. And hopefully there'll be some time for questions as well at the end. So Learning Science as a company, we're a digital software education company, and we focus on two main products, LabSim, so simulations for students to become familiar with labs before going in to practicals. So that could be familiarizing yourself with equipment, familiarizing yourself with technique as well. And then the other product is Smart Worksheets, which can either be put in as a pre-lab or post-lab, and essentially takes what your lab manual, written lab manual is, and turns it into an online digital format, where students are able to complete a lab report, for say, online, or able to do any pre-lab calculations and anything like that online as well. So Smart Worksheets is what I'm going to focus on. With that, we are supporting hundreds of mainly higher education departments, and we mainly focus on university students in terms of trying to engage in their student experience and their skills for when they leave university as well. With these, we offer both packages and bespoke solutions. So bespoke meaning we'll usually end up having that interaction with an academic, sit down, design the smart worksheet, for example, and make sure it sits in line with what the experiments are. So first and foremost, the ones who design these smart worksheets were scientists, and then who have learnt to code. So our background is very much in line with anyone we interact with in the academic world as well. So smart worksheets themselves are as I said, an online post-lab or pre-lab report or activity that you can use with students. And what they offer is real-time feedback with where you can code in specific incorrect answers, so that students are actually really getting what they need out of this, which means, sometimes you might have instructor bias, sometimes, you don't know what demonstrators can be like one from the other. So with this, you can actually really enhance what sort of feedback the students are getting, make sure everyone's getting that fair amount of feedback and equal feedback as well. And they can do calculations, they can do drop-down questions, we do graphing in here as well. So a lot of this is important to make sure that we make it inclusive as well. In terms of why inclusivity itself is important for the company, where we work with universities worldwide and companies worldwide. So we need to be able to understand what the diverse cultural needs are, diverse academic needs are, and even in just one university, the student body is diverse. And you can't just have one size fits all for everyone. So you need to be able to account for how do we actually cater for everyone and make sure that we're enhancing and thinking about all the marginalized groups that might not be able to use tech in the same way that our world is built. Because I think we like to think of the world as being disabling rather than someone being disabled. Hopefully that makes sense. So the main ethos is to be able to make sure these smart worksheets work for everyone. And why is that important for smart worksheets? So if you think about smart worksheets, we're going from written to online in a way that's inclusive in itself, because we're taking away a lot of that written extra cognitive load of being able to, put down all of your data into paper and be able to just use the smart worksheets, do the calculation, and also get that feedback at the same time whilst you're doing those calculations and plugging them in here. And often, we've got to make sure that these go into new universities, that these are not too unfamiliar. So we need to be able to make sure students have clear instruction on how to use things, clear feedback as well, and also clear ways to enhance the way that they experience the smart worksheet as well. And because it's used by thousands of students online over the world, we need to be able to think about how everyone's interacting with it. So in terms of, we're doing a student insight survey at the moment, and I thought this is a really nice quote to put in from one of the students who use smart worksheets. It really highlights the work that we're trying to do in terms of trying to alleviate some of the anxieties around doing lab reports, getting grades and stuff like that. So I'll just leave that up for a few more seconds so people can read it. Okay, hope everyone's read it. Yeah, great. So I'll move on to our considerations. So when you're thinking about inclusive design, it's not just about how something looks, it's also how something's read, how someone experiences it, and looking at how they're interacting with it, essentially. So there are a few parameters that you need to think about. These are only a few of them that I've put on here. There's a lot more to go into, and if I was to stand here and go through it, it would be a whole day of talking, basically. So one of the first important things you need to think about is the language you use. So things like metaphors, jargon, idioms, things like that might not be accessible to someone who doesn't have English as their first language. It's also important to think about, students who might struggle with reading as well, and thinking about how we simplify that language for the particular year that you're trying to target. Another thing to think about is the user experience itself. So can they zoom into the text? Can they change the theming of the resource? Can they change it to dark mode, for example? I hate light mode. Everything on my phone and everything on all of my computers and everything is on dark mode. So to have that's a very basic option, basically, to have. Thinking about how the iconography is used, whether all the sections are clearly labeled. All of this is really important when it comes to inclusive design and plays a hand in the accessibility side as well. Another thing to think about is effective feedback. As I said, we put in real-time feedback. So if, for example, a student's trying to complete a question, incorrect try again isn't good enough. You need to be able to tell them what exactly they've, where exactly they've gone wrong, so that they're able to then complete that question and complete that calculation and actually understand where that's gone wrong as well. And I think that also takes a little bit of anxiety out of getting questions wrong, because they've got that, they know they're going to be able to have that help in the smart worksheets as well. Another thing to think about is the Universal Design for Learning framework. Now, this also is a behemoth in terms of the amount of considerations you need to think about. And it's thinking about, again, how someone interacts with your resource, what sort of language you use, what sort of visual representations you might have of people and places. Are they inclusive in terms of are they representative of your class? Also thinking about and the whole experience, the holistic experience of using that resource. Is it actually inclusive? Does it feel like you're alienating someone? Are you thinking only of a very westernized, neurotypical, inaccessible way of using this resource? So that's what inclusive design and considerations to us means. And within that, we see accessibility sitting in that sort of umbrella. So some of the things that you want to think about with accessibility, well, one of the main things is, the most simplest thing is it keyboard tabbable? For someone to use a mouse, you need some dexterity, and not everyone's going to have that dexterity to be able to use a trackpad or a mouse. So for you to be able to just simply use the arrow keys to tab down from one question to the other is a simple fix, but I think it has a huge impact for how you actually interact with the resource. Another thing is about screen readers. Now, Sarah mentioned alt text yesterday, and one of the things that when you write alt text is to make sure that it's good alt text, is text that the student can actually use without looking at an image or any other sort of element, and be able to complete it. So it's taking those considerations into place. A most important thing for a screen reader is also what I put here, are sections clearly labeled and semantically correct. So semantics is the idea of giving meaning to what's presented on a web page, for example. So you're not just showing it in view with, like, say, different font sizes. They actually have meaning. So here on the right side, you can see a snippet of how headings might be labeled up. So you go from H1, H2 to H3. So this is something that you would have to make sure when you're creating a digital resource. But I also think this is important when you're doing online resources as well, when you're creating a document, because you can actually put this into place in a Google Doc, for example. Another thing to think about is colors. Now, this is not just color contrast, where you need to think about how well does one color set off the other for someone to be able to read. Now, the guidelines say it has to be at least a ratio of 4.5 to 1, which means, if you've got a really light color, you need to be able to have, in simple terms, a rather dark color to be there for someone to be able to read that properly, and for someone with visual impairment specifically to be able to read that. Another thing to think about is color blindness, so red and green. If you've got red and green components, what other things are you using there to be able to differentiate? For example, in a graph, if you've got a red line of fit and a green line of fit, how are you differentiating it? Are you using dots and dashes to be able to differentiate it? So these are all questions that you have to think about when you're building an online resource. And I think it's also, it translates pretty well when you're building, when you're making not just web-based resources, but also text-based resources as well. So that was a quick snapshot of the sort of considerations that we have to go through and think about. And I just wanted to go through what we're currently doing. So at the moment, we're just finishing up research into inclusive design practices, which I mentioned. We've done case studies on different types of smart worksheets that we have and looked at what are we doing well and what do we need to do better? Are there global changes that we need to make and think about? Is the language that we're using good? Are we representing people and place well in there, for example? And another thing is also, we've been working a lot on our accessibility processes. So I'm going to, hopefully this works, show you a before and after of what the statistics up there looks like. So if you all don't mind closing your eyes or looking away from the screen for a second, and I will play this.
Table with 2 rows and 4 columns. Row 1, column 1, baseline, correct answers. Column 2, points awarded. Column 3, auto sort. Column 4, not finished. Row 2, correct answers. Column 1, baseline, correct. 06. Points awarded. Column 2, points awarded. 06. Auto sort. Column 3, auto sort. 06. Not finished. Column 4, not finished. 6 out of table.
So that's what a screen reader would have read without any ARIA labeling or without any considerations to accessibility for this. Could anyone understand what they were what was said there? No, I hope not. And this is what it sounds like after some consideration to ARIA, like to accessibility.
List plus ARIA. Grouping list with 4 items. Number of correct answers, 0 out of 6. Number of points awarded, 0 out of 6. Number of auto-solved questions, 0 out of 6. Number of questions not finished, 6 out of 6. Out of list, out of grouping.
So did people understand what that was saying? So it's just making simple changes to code where you are adding text description to what each element might mean, or adding ARIA labeling, which again helps the screen reader identify what exactly that group is, what exactly that element is, and understanding what you are trying to put across with that online resource. So this is just a short snapshot of what it is. I've listened to screen readers and they are quite a pain to listen to, so I applaud anyone who is able to use them well. So anything that we can make whoever's using a screen reader's life easier is what we're trying to do here, basically, and make it clear for a student to be able to go through and understand what's going on. And another thing that we've done is worked with students. So you're going to be hearing from Parag actually just after about the student-led work that we've done on inclusivity. So this was one of the projects that we worked with Parag and his project partner and Joe Rushworth from De Montfort University. And the idea was to explore adding avatars and a diverse range of avatars with diverse range of pronouns in there. I won't go too much into it. I don't want to spoil his talk. So please go along if you're interested. So we've got initiatives like this in place to be able to really understand what the student wants, because at the heart of it, what we're focused on is the student experience. And it would be silly not to actually listen to and work with students when they are the focus of our products and our work. So hopefully I've given you a quick overview of what we do, what we consider in our work when we think about accessibility and inclusivity. And in terms of future direction, what we're hoping to do is to do further research on inclusive design. So that involves user testing, so looking at before and after, looking at how students interact with some of the R&D work that we do, thinking about future accessible technologies. So I think currently there's a Braille, a printer that can print out graphs and spectra in Braille, which is amazing. Like, how would you work with that? Or how do you work with Braille keyboards and things like that as well? So thinking about how we can increase that compatibility and further that student experience, and really dig into that smart worksheets for all ethos. And the other thing that we do is we have groups for community of practice groups where we discuss similar things like this. And one of the ones that aligns with this is the equality, diversity, and inclusion community practice. And Leanne's here, who is also a co-chair of that community practice group, and we just met last Wednesday. And one of the discussions that we had was about one of the case studies that came out from, I think, the US on testimonials from visually impaired students in labs. And we discussed it's basically a group of academics where we're able to discuss what sort of actions they've been able to take, what sort of support they have, and how we can kind of mobilize and take it further with that network and look at collaborations, look at what we can do as well as a company. So it's really trying to build a network of people to be able to do this work as well. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for listening and taking your time. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Angela. That was really nice, and really nice to see a follow on from what Sarah was talking about yesterday with some practical solutions. Do you have any questions for Angela, either in the room or online? Nick? Oh, yeah, just wait for the microphone.
So I was interested in you saying that the smart sheets were good for students with anxiety and ADHD. Did you have any data about better performance of those students with the smart sheet?
So that was actually one of the quotes from the students that we've had in Student Insight survey. Emily's the one who's actually doing most of the educational research side of it. So was there anything that you wanted to add from that?
Yeah, just popped in.
Hi, yes, so this survey is actually ongoing and will be running until May. I'm really looking forward to crunching that data. We didn't ask specifically about whether they had, we did ask a question on whether they considered themselves to have additional learning needs, but we didn't ask them any further than that. So I'm looking forward to seeing whether the yes and I get support group, the yes but I don't get additional support group, and the no group and the unsure group, what their perceptions and use of smart worksheets and lab sims are. So maybe next year I might be back with some more insight into that.
Brilliant, thank you, Emily. Any other questions? Are there any online? Is anyone monitoring what's happening online?
Do you want me to unplug?
Yes, Jane. Yeah, Kath's just on our way. We're getting our steps in doing this meeting.
Hi. So how have you found COVID and hybrid learning? How has that really helped the company? And are you hoping that this change of moving to a lot of online use, are you hoping that's gonna be there for good in terms of the bridges it builds for lots of people and lots of different groups? I think it's really, really important that this sort of work stays as it is, regardless of us moving back to a more standardized, localized learning approach.
So we've been around for 15 years now. So we've been doing online digital education software for that long. And You'd hope that we'd be able to carry that on. It doesn't look like we're, you know, moving away from a world where we're relying less. We're seeming to rely more and more on technology. So it only makes sense for us to be able to enhance the sort of experience that someone would have, and not just stop at the minimal viable product, to actually go further and do what we perceive to be the future and the cutting edge, and keep innovating on that. That's how we can be leaders in the sort of work that we do. And it's just really thinking about that and thinking ahead and thinking what's actually missing at the moment, and actually talking to the people who do need all of this tech in place and working with them to be able to sort that out, really. Hope that answers your question.
Brilliant, thank you. If we can just give Angela another round of applause.